Steering wheel felt wrong in my hands. Too loose. Like my grip had gone somewhere else entirely. I was somewhere outside of Knoxville on I-40, 4 hours from home, when my neighbor Paulette called. I almost didn't pick up. We were friendly but not close. The kind of neighbors who wave from driveways and trade small talk about the weather. She'd never called me once in 7 years. "Something's wrong at your house," she said, and her voice was doing that thing voices do when someone is trying to stay calm and failing. "I can hear Connor. He's been screaming for 20 minutes and it's not stopping. I knocked on the door and your sister-in-law told me everything was fine and shut it in my face." I said her name. "Paulette. I'm calling you because I don't know what else to do. I don't know if I should call 911. "Call 911, I said. "Right now. Don't wait for me." I hung up and pulled onto the shoulder of the highway. My hands weren't shaking yet. That came later. Right then, I was just very still, the way I get when something bad is happening and there's nothing I can do except think clearly or fall apart. I'd spent 11 years as a forensic investigator for the state insurance fraud division. I knew how to stay methodical when everything in me wanted to break. I pulled up the whole monitoring app on my phone. I have a system in the house, nothing elaborate, just cameras in the main rooms that I installed 3 years ago after we had a break-in. Living room, kitchen, back hallway, basement. I never thought I'd use it for this. The basement feed loaded first. Connor was in the far corner behind the water heater. He's 8 years old and small for his age, and he looked even smaller on that screen. He had his knees pulled up and his arms wrapped around them, and he was rocking. His mouth was open. Even without audio, I could see he was screaming. My sister-in-law Renee's husband, a man named Cliff Osborne, was sitting at the top of the basement stairs with his arms crossed and the look of someone waiting for something to be finished. My sister-in-law stood behind him with her phone out, filming. My wife died 14 months ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, 7 months from diagnosis to the end. Her name was Judith. She was 36. And when she died, I became the only thing standing between Connor and a world that had already taken too much from him. Judith's family descended after the funeral the way they always did. Loud opinions about everything, never any actual help. Her sister Renee had been angling for involvement in Connor's life since before Judith was even gone. She'd told Judith directly, while Judith was still in hospice, that she was concerned about Connor's environment and that she thought more family presence would be good for him. Judith had looked at me from her bed with those exhausted eyes and said quietly, "Watch Renee." I thought she meant the usual family politics. I hadn't understood what she actually meant until much later. I pressed record on the app. Then I called my brother. "I need you at my house. Right now. Don't argue with me." My brother Teddy said, "What's happening?" "Something is wrong with Connor. Renee is there. I need someone I trust inside that house before the police arrive." Teddy said, "I'm 20 minutes away. Go." I merged back onto the highway and I drove. 4 hours and I needed to be there in 2. I drove the way you drive when the math doesn't work, but you do it anyway. I need to back up. Because what happened that afternoon didn't start that afternoon. It started, as far as I can tell, about 9 months ago when Renee began pushing for respite weekends. Her phrase, not mine. She said I needed rest. She said Connor needed family time. She said it slowly and with concern in her voice, the way you say things you've rehearsed. I was working long hours, and I was grieving, and Connor was struggling in school, and I was stretched in every direction at once, so I said yes. I said yes twice. And then I started noticing things. Connor came home quieter after those weekends. Not the regular quiet of a shy kid, but a specific closed-off kind of quiet, like a door that had been shut and locked from the inside. He stopped eating his breakfast cereal. He'd always loved the stuff. Could go through a box in 4 days, and when I asked about it, he just shrugged. He started sleeping with the light on and wouldn't tell me why. His second-grade teacher, a woman named Mrs. Ellison, called me in February to say she was a little concerned because Connor had drawn a picture in art class that she wanted to discuss. I went in and she showed me the picture, a small figure in a dark room, a woman watching from a doorway with a big smile. "Did you ask him about it?" I said. He said it was from a dream, she said. I wanted you to know. I sat with that for 2 weeks and told myself it was grief. Kids process things in pictures. He was missing his mother. That was the explanation that was easier to live with, so I chose it, and I hate myself for that now. I started paying closer attention after the picture, not because of one thing, but because of the accumulation of small things that you explain away individually until one day you can't explain any of them away anymore. The way Connor tensed when Renee's name came up. The way he'd started checking the lock on his bedroom door at night. The way he'd stopped mentioning the respite weekends himself. He used to ask when the next one was, and then he just stopped asking entirely, and I'd noticed it, but I hadn't asked why. I set up a voice recorder in his room. Not because I had anything specific I was looking for. I just needed to know. I didn't have to wait long. 6 days after I put the recorder in there, I got the audio. Connor was talking in his sleep. Kids do that sometimes. Except this wasn't the usual mumbling. He was saying clearly and with a terror in his small voice that I had to stop the recording twice before I could finish listening. I won't tell. I won't tell. I promise I won't. The next morning, I installed cameras in the basement and the hallway outside his room. I documented every visit after that. I said nothing to Renee. I smiled and nodded and let her believe she had complete control over how this was going. Because the thing about 11 years of fraud investigation is that you learn to let people keep digging their own holes. I also added Connor to my health insurance plan as primary dependent, consulted a family attorney named Sean Greer, who told me my legal standing was solid, and quietly began compiling a file. I was outside of Cookville when Teddy texted, "Inside. Police are here. Connor is okay. He's with me. Come home." I don't know what happened over those next 2 hours. I don't remember what I thought about or what music I played or whether I stopped for gas. I have a vague memory of a rest stop somewhere, and the overhead lights in the bathroom being too bright. Everything had that strange compressed quality where the outside world stops meaning anything and there's only the distance between you and the person you need to get to. I pulled onto my street at 8:14 in the evening. There were 2 police cruisers outside my house and a Tennessee DCS vehicle and a small cluster of neighbors on the sidewalk. Paulette was among them. She raised her hand when she saw my truck, and the expression on her face was the expression of someone who had done the right thing and was still frightened by how necessary it had been. Renee was sitting in the back of one of the cruisers. Her husband Cliff was standing on my front lawn talking to a detective, his arms crossed, his voice too loud. I could see his mouth moving, and I knew that tone, defensive, explaining, building the version of events that protected him. Teddy met me at the door. "Connor's upstairs," he said. "He asked for you. They haven't interviewed him yet. I told him it needed to wait for you." "What happened?" Teddy's jaw tightened. "The basement. They locked him in the basement apparently. Not the first time from what he's saying. Something about teaching him to stop being afraid of the dark. He'd told Renee he was scared of the dark last month and he stopped. Go see him. The rest can wait." Connor was on his bed with a fleece blanket pulled around him even though it was June. The paramedic who'd been with him, a calm young woman who introduced herself as Viv, gave me a small nod and stepped back. There were red marks on Connor's wrists from where he'd apparently been trying to work the door handle. When he saw me, he made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not a word. Just a sound. The kind that comes from somewhere below language. I sat on the edge of the bed and put my arms around him, and he pressed his face against my shoulder and cried the way kids cry when they've been holding it for so long that it all comes at once. I held him and I didn't say anything for a long time. There wasn't anything to say that mattered more than just being there. "She said you wouldn't believe me," Connor said eventually. His voice was muffled against my shirt. "She said you'd think I was making it up." "I believe you," I said. "I have believed you. I just needed to be able to prove it." He pulled back a little and looked at me. "You knew?" I suspected. I wasn't sure how much. He was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't just the basement," he said. I kept my voice level. "I know, buddy. You don't have to tell me tonight. There are people whose whole job is listening to kids tell them about stuff like this, and you're going to talk to one of them, and they're going to write it all down. You just have to tell the truth. Can you do that?" He nodded. He looked very small and very tired. "She said I was bad," he said quietly. "She said Mom knew I was bad. That's why she got sick." The temperature in the room didn't change. I was aware of that factually. But something happened in my chest that I don't have a clean word for. I looked at my son and I thought about Judith in that hospice bed telling me to watch Renee, and I thought about the 9 months I had spent telling myself it was just grief, just adjustment, just a sensitive kid missing his mother. And I understood with a clarity that was almost physical exactly what Renee Osborne had been doing and exactly how long she had been doing it. "That's not true," I said. "Mom being sick had nothing to do with you. I need you to know that." "I know," he said, but he said it the way kids say things they've been told and haven't quite believed yet. "We're going to keep working on that one," I said. Vivid had stepped quietly back into the room. "Mr. Holt," she said, "the detective would like to speak with you when you're ready." Detective Morales was a woman about my age, mid-40s, with the particular quality of tired alertness that I recognized from my own job. She shook my hand in the hallway and got straight to it. "Your son is being evaluated. We're going to need a full interview tomorrow with a child advocacy specialist. The Department of Children's Services is already involved. I want to be straightforward with you. What we saw in that basement, the marks on his wrists, what your neighbor described hearing, we're treating this as a criminal matter." "Good," I said. She studied me for a moment. "Your brother mentioned there might be additional documentation." "There is." I had my laptop bag over my shoulder. I grabbed it from my truck. 9 months of it. Video, audio, written logs. "I'll walk you through all of it." "You documented this for 9 months and didn't come to us?" I heard the question underneath the question. I suspected something was wrong. I didn't have evidence of a crime. I had evidence of a prime. In my experience, bringing a pattern to law enforcement without documentation of the underlying conduct results in a he said, she said that usually resolves in favor of the adult with better lawyers. I looked at her steadily. I waited until I had enough that she couldn't explain it away. I was 2 weeks away from filing a civil petition to terminate visitation permanently. Tonight accelerated the timeline. Detective Morales was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you do for a living?" "Insurance fraud investigator. State Division." She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Let's look at what you have." We worked through the documentation for 3 hours in my kitchen. I'd backed everything to 3 separate locations: local drive, cloud storage, and a physical hard drive that I'd mailed to my attorney 3 months ago. The audio files, the video from the basement showing multiple incidents, the written log I'd kept starting the night I listened to Connor's sleep recording, Mrs. Ellison's notes from February, the pediatrician's record from March that I'd had Connor's arm looked at when he came home with a bruise Renee had explained as a fall. Around midnight, Detective Morales looked up from the screen. "There's more here than child endangerment," she said. "I know." She waited. "Judith, my wife, had a $200,000 life insurance policy. I'm the primary beneficiary. But 6 months ago, Renee came to me with a request to be named secondary beneficiary in case something happened to me. She said it was for Connor's protection. She wanted to be named as Connor's legal guardian in the same document." I set a folder on the table. I had my attorney look at the request. The way it was structured, if I died and Renee became guardian, she would have had full control of the policy payout until Connor turned 25. She also would have controlled the proceeds from the sale of this house. Morales was very still. I declined the request. Renee was upset, but she accepted it, or she seemed to. 2 months later, she started suggesting I should take on more physically demanding cases. There's a subset of fraud investigation that involves field visits to properties, occasionally in remote areas. She mentioned twice that I looked overworked, that the stress was going to catch up with me. I held Detective Morales's gaze. "Judith's sister has $34,000 in credit card debt and a second mortgage on her house. I found that out in April." The detective closed her laptop. "I'm going to need to bring in a financial crimes detective," she said. "I know," I said again. What I had spent 9 months building was not, at its core, a child abuse case. Or rather, it was that, but it was also the exterior surface of something underneath. Renee had needed two things: for Connor to be too psychologically fragile to be believed as a witness, and for me to be out of the picture. She'd been working on both simultaneously. The basement wasn't just cruelty. It was a calculated dismantling of a child's credibility and stability, done with enough deniability that any individual incident could be written off as misguided discipline. She hadn't counted on the fact that I investigate fraud for a living. She hadn't counted on the fact that Judith had warned me. She hadn't counted on Paulette. Connor stayed at Teddy's for the next 6 weeks while my house was processed, and while I navigated the machinery of what came next. The Department of Children's Services assigned a caseworker named Miss Mission Fowler, who met with Connor 3 times before he started opening up. The Child Advocacy Center interview happened on a Wednesday morning with a specialist named Dr. Reeve, who was patient and skilled in the particular way of someone who has learned to let children move at their own speed. Connor told them about 7 separate incidents in the basement over 9 months. He told them about being made to stand in the corner of Renee's kitchen for 3 hours because he'd spilled a glass of milk. He told them about being called his mother's mistake when Cliff was drunk one Christmas. He told them about the night Renee took his stuffed dog, the one Judith had given him in the hospital, and locked it in the basement, and told him he could have it back when he stopped being a baby. He told them all of this in a calm, flat voice with his hands in his lap. And Dr. Telv Reeve told me afterward that the flatness itself was diagnostic. "Children who've been conditioned to minimize their experience talk like that," she said. "It doesn't mean it didn't affect him. It means they taught him to speak about himself in a way that sounded manageable." The charges came down on a Friday. Cliff Osborne, child endangerment, false imprisonment of a minor, contributing to the abuse or neglect of a child. Renee Osborne, saying, plus conspiracy. Because the financial crimes detective had found emails, not vague ones, specific ones from 8 months ago, to a cousin of Renee's who worked in construction, asking about the possibility of a situation being arranged at a work site. The cousin had declined and hadn't reported it. He cooperated when detectives came to him because some people make the wrong choice once and the right choice when it matters. Renee's attorney argued that the emails were taken out of context, that a situation referred to a contract dispute, that Renee was a grieving woman who had made poor decisions in the aftermath of her sister's death, and that none of it constituted criminal intent. The DA's office presented the insurance document request, the financial records, the timeline of the abuse alongside the timeline of Renee's escalating debt, and the testimony of the cousin. They presented the basement footage and the audio and 9 months of meticulous documentation. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I was outside the courthouse with Teddy and my attorney Sean when the verdict came through on Sean's phone. Guilty on all counts. Both of them. Teddy exhaled beside me. I said nothing. I just stood there for a moment with the afternoon sun on my face and thought about Judith saying, "Watch, Renee?" And I thought about what I should have understood sooner, and I let myself feel the grief and the anger and the relief all at once, without trying to sort them into separate containers. Sean squeezed my arm. "Sentencing in 6 weeks. I'll be there," I said. Paulette testified at sentencing. She hadn't been asked to. She'd requested to speak. She talked about the 7 years she'd lived next door, about the summer Judith got sick and how she'd brought over casseroles because she didn't know what else to do, about the morning she'd heard Connor screaming and knocked on that door and had it shut in her face. She said, "I almost didn't call. I almost told myself it wasn't my business. I need every person in this courtroom to understand that I almost didn't call." Mrs. Ellison sent a written statement about the drawing. Connor's pediatrician documented the bruise from March. Dr. Reeves submitted a 20-page psychological evaluation. Cliff Osborne received 8 years. The judge cited the physical confinement, the duration, the deliberate targeting of a grieving child. Renee received 14 years. The judge read from the sentencing statement for almost 10 minutes, and the room was quiet the whole time. She covered the manipulation, the financial motive, the emails, the systematic psychological conditioning of an 8-year-old boy. She said near the end, "You entered this child's life under the guise of love for your deceased sister, and you used that trust as a weapon. You took a child who was already broken open by grief, and you drove that grief deeper into him deliberately and methodically. This court can find no mitigating circumstance that adequately accounts for that." Renee's parental visitation rights. She had none legally, but there had been a pending petition she'd filed for court-sanctioned visits were denied permanently. Any member of the Osborne family was prohibited from contacting Connor until he turned 18, at which point the decision would be entirely his. I took Connor out of school for a week after sentencing. We drove to the Smokies and stayed in a cabin I'd rented near Gatlinburg. No agenda, no schedule. We hiked the easy trails because Connor was still working up to the longer ones. We ate at a diner 3 mornings in a row because he decided he liked their blueberry pancakes. We sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the hills go dark. On the second night, he asked me if I was sad. "About Mom," I said. "About everything." I thought about that for a minute. "Yeah," I said. "I'm sad about a lot of things, but not about how it ended up. I think we're going to be okay." He was quiet for a while. Then she said I couldn't have the stuffed dog back until I stopped being a baby. He paused. "I never got it back." I'd found the dog in Renee's guest room when I'd been working with police on the property search. I'd taken it with me. It was in my bag in the cabin. I went inside and got it and brought it out and set it in his lap without making anything of it. Connor picked it up and held it against his chest and didn't say anything, and I looked out at the mountains getting dark and didn't say anything either. That was 6 months ago. Connor's in therapy twice a week with a child psychologist named Dr. Aldridge, who he says is pretty okay for an adult. He's back in school, and his teacher this year, Mr. Cantu, told me at the fall conference that Connor had made 2 friends and was finding his footing. He's eating his cereal again. He still sleeps with the light on, but the door stays open now, and I've stopped pretending I don't notice when I check on him at night, and he's watching to make sure the light in the hallway is still there. A few weeks ago, I found a drawing on the kitchen table he'd left out by accident. A small figure and a taller figure on a hiking trail. Mountains in the background. The taller figure had its hand on the smaller one's shoulder. I left it on the table. I didn't say anything about it. Some things you protect by not putting them into words. Renee's civil liability case was settled last month. Between the fraud judgment for the mishandled estate funds she'd been pulling from since before Judith died, and the civil suit I filed for damages related to Connor's psychological injury, the total came to just over $180,000. None of that money will ever fully account for what Connor lost. But it's sitting in a custodial account in his name, and when he's 25, it will be his to do with as he chooses. Judith's stuffed dog sits on Connor's windowsill now. He doesn't sleep with it anymore, but he also hasn't moved it. It's just there in the window, in the sun, watching the street. I think about Paulette a lot, about how she almost didn't call, about how the whole thing turns on that moment in her kitchen when she picked up the phone and decided that the possibility of being wrong was less important than the possibility that she was right. If you're watching this and something about it is familiar to you, not the big dramatic pieces, but the small ones, the quietness, the pictures a child draws, the way a kid stops mentioning something they used to talk about. Please don't let yourself wait for the version that's impossible to doubt. Document what you see. Talk to someone who knows how to listen. Trust that you know your child better than anyone who would prefer you didn't. Connor's out back right now. I can hear him from where I'm sitting. He found a neighbor kid who's also into dinosaurs, and they've been out there for an hour arguing about whether a Spinosaurus could beat an Allosaurus in a fight. Connor is saying no, the Spinosaurus was primarily a fish eater and would have avoided a direct confrontation, which I think shows either a very solid grasp of paleontology or an 8-year-old's understanding that some fights aren't worth having. I'd call it both. There's a drawing on my kitchen table that I keep not moving. 2 figures on a trail. Mountains. A hand on a shoulder. Connor didn't show it to me. He left it out and went back to his room, And I think that's the only way he knew how to say the thing he didn't have words for yet. Kids do that. They put the real things sideways, in pictures. In the stuffed dog they stop sleeping with but won't put away, in the way they start eating their cereal again one morning without making a thing of it. I think about what it cost him to hold all of that inside for 9 months, to learn at 8 years old that the person who was supposed to love him could also be the person he needed to hide from. That's not a lesson any child should have to carry. But he carried it. He kept going to school and drawing pictures and arguing about dinosaurs, and underneath all of that, he was trying to survive something that no one around him had figured out yet. That kind of endurance in a child, quiet, invisible, daily, is something I don't have a word for that feels adequate. Here's what I know about how this unfolded. Renee counted on several things. That grief would make me less attentive, that Connor's age would make him less credible, and that her position as family would give her cover. She was right about all three of those things for a while. I was less attentive. Connor was not immediately believed. Family does give cover. What she miscalculated was the difference between someone who is temporarily blind and someone who stays that way. The moment I found Connor's sleep recording and heard him say, "I won't tell, I promise I won't," something in me made a decision, not a dramatic one. Just a quiet, methodical one. I stopped trying to explain things away and started documenting them. That's it. That's the whole turning point. Not a confrontation, not a dramatic accusation, just the decision to stop being comfortable and start paying attention. What followed from that one decision was 9 months of evidence that Renee could not untangle herself from. Every consequence she faced, the criminal charges, the financial judgment, the 14 years, trace back directly to choices she made while she believed no one was paying attention. That's how it works, in my experience. Not cosmic justice, not fate, just a plain arithmetic of actions and their records. She built something over 9 months and it held her weight until it didn't. I'm not a perfect father. I missed things I shouldn't have missed. I chose the easier explanation too many times for too long. The drawing Connor's teacher showed me in February should have been enough. It wasn't, and I live with that. What I can tell you is that when it mattered, I chose to look directly at what was in front of me instead of away from it. I chose to be rigorous when I was also terrified, and I chose to trust that the truth, documented carefully and presented honestly, would be enough. It was. Paulette almost didn't make that call. She told the courtroom that herself. She almost decided it wasn't her business. I think about that a lot, how everything, all of it, required one neighbor to choose discomfort over distance. Connor needed her to pick up the phone more than either of them knew. Being honest about what you're witnessing, even when it costs you something, is not a small thing. It is, in a lot of situations, the only thing. Connor is going to be okay. He's already more okay than I feared he would be. He's loud about dinosaurs and quiet about the hard stuff and learning. Slowly, to let the hard stuff out too. We're both learning that. The stuffed dog is still in the window.